Thank you all for joining us. We will be beginning shortly. For those of you joining by phone, you're in a listen mode only and unable to ask questions. You still have time to join by using the app or the web page link that we emailed earlier. While waiting, we encourage you to start writing your questions in the Q&A box. We will answer as many questions as possible during the town hall today. If you're a firefighter, please include your local you belong to in your question so that we can address the question specifically to you. If you're a fire chief, please let us know the department you belong to in your question as well. And we'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and we'll be beginning shortly. Thank you.
Good afternoon or good morning, and welcome to our first town hall of the new year. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We have a pretty strong registration. I'm Brian Rice. I'm the president of the California Professional Firefighters. As you know, California is experiencing a surge of COVID-19 cases, and it has pushed our healthcare system to the brink. Each of you are answering that call and putting your lives on the line and your families at risk every single day. Many of our members have become seriously ill from the virus. Some are still in recovery, even after months past the infection. We lost two of our brothers from UFLAC Local 112, Jose Perez and George Roca, to this virus. And too many of our families have borne the unthinkable tragedy of loved ones lost due to COVID-19. And now we have a ray of hope. We have a vaccine, but we're also in the midst of a surge that potentially, not necessarily going to say potentially, it's scary and it's critical. A lot of you have already received the vaccine. Many of you will be receiving it in the next week. I would like to introduce joining me today to talk about COVID-19 and the vaccination and what the next couple of months look like in managing the virus. I want everybody to welcome the Contra Costa County Fire Medical Director, Dr. Peter Benson. Thank you, Dr. Benson. Los Angeles County Fire Medical Director, Dr. Clayton Kazan. Thank you, Dr. Kazan. And then somebody that I'm greatly familiar with, the Sacramento Fire Medical Director, Dr. Kevin Mackey. Also with us today, and who is going to co-hosting and taking over the hosting duty, is Mike High. Mike is the EMS Health and Safety Director of the California Professional Firefighters, and we're going to share these duties. Also with us today is the Cpf Executive Board, and I'm going to take a moment to introduce them. Our vice presidents, First District Daryl Roberts, Second District Rex Pritchard, Third District Jair Juarez. Jair is on and off. He is on duty today, but we'll see him. Fourth District Vice President Vince Wells, Fifth District Charlie Martinez, Sixth District Tim Edwards, although he's not on at the moment. Seventh District Dave Gelati, Eighth District Freddie Escobar, and then our Secretary Treasurer, Mike Lopez. I want to thank each of you for joining us today. We had a little bit of a switch in our schedule. We had the Health and Human Services Director who was going to join us, Dr. Mark Galley. And Dr. Galley is Governor Newsom's point person on the medical side of this. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with Dr. Galley and the governor, and Dr. Galley got called away for two issues. One was the COVID response, but the second one is there's going to be some budgetary announcements this afternoon. He has to share the stage with the governor on. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn those questions over to Dr. Benson, Dr. Kazan, and Dr. Mackey. They're more than qualified to help us out there. One little bit of housekeeping. I want to do it as a reminder to our audience. We will have a question and answer portion, and it's open to all of you, and you'll be able to ask the questions to our panelists later in the town hall. We encourage you to write your questions in the Q&A section. Please include your name, local, and department. Please include your name, local, and department in your question. And without any further delay, Dr. Benson, Dr. Kazan, Dr. Mackey, just want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to start with this. This is a question to each of you, and I'll start with Dr. Benson, and we'll go to Dr. Kazan, and then Dr. Mackey. And the question is, one of the things that we want to ask each of you, how is your department and the region that you're working in responding to the COVID situation? Can you kind of give us a little rundown that you're seeing in your department and in your region?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Rice. Thank you very much for having me. Great honor to be here. Really, our biggest priority, of course, is keeping our crews safe. And to that end, we've been doing aggressive testing, using both antigen tests, COVID PCR swabs in combination, which has been able to help us not only quickly identify those who have been tested positive, but also those who didn't and can potentially get back to work sooner. Many of our crews initially in the pandemic were frustrated and that they could not stay on duty just because of some of the very strict COVID precautions requiring the mandatory 10 days off, the 14 days off. They might get a common cold or some other symptoms that may represent COVID, but ultimately were something else. And by being able to identify that quickly, we've been able to get our crews back who are feeling well, who want to work, and that's been significant for keeping our personnel and supplies up and at an acceptable level. Obviously, it's a challenge, and you get to a point, and I'll let Dr. Kazan talk about this next, but you get to a point where you get so overwhelmed, such as the LA County situation, where those kind of interventions just break down and you're really in a totally different level. But for us, we have had some significant success with that approach.
And thank you, Dr. Benson. Before I turn this over to Mike Fye, I kind of went off script, Mike, but I'm going to get us back on. And I'm going to go to Dr. Kazan. And Dr. Kazan, you're LA County Fire's medical director. Really, the situation in the county of Los Angeles appears to be pretty dire, and the stress not only on the hospital system, but the pre-hospital response system. From what I'm hearing is unlike we've ever seen before. Can you give us an update overall in the county, and then what you're seeing in the overall experience, and are we seeing a turn?
Sure. So from County Fire's perspective, we're sitting right now at about 950 positives dating back to March. Of those 950, about 700 of them have been in the last 5 weeks. So we've had significant challenges. We've had a rolling, probably 10 to 15% of our workforce out at any given time. And we were just getting kind of kicked in the teeth that we would get, just when we start getting people back, we get 20 people back, but 25 more would go out sick. And we had peaked at about 340 that were out sick all at once. And now, thankfully, we seem to be starting to trend down. We have 4 or 5 days in a row where we've returned more than we lost. So we're down to about 240. We've had several of them hit the hospital. We've had a handful hit the ICU. But for the most part, our people are recovering. They tend to be younger, healthy. But I will say that this is a very, very crazy illness. I had someone just email me this morning saying, this is a respiratory illness. And I go, no, it's not. It's a respiratory illness and an inflammatory illness, and it does some very strange things throughout the body. So most of our people were able to return back at that kind of 10 to 12 day mark. But we've had about 30% of our people that go out sick that are not ready to return at that 14-day mark. And then we've had about 9 to 10% of our people not ready to go back at a month. And we have people that are probably going to have permanent side effects as a result of it. So it's been a big challenge. On the bright side, we think the reason that we have been able to get some success in seeing the number of our out sicks go down is because we did our first day of mass vaccination on Christmas Eve. And we think that part of the reason why our number out sick is beginning to drop is some of the immunity that we have gained from that first vaccine on such a large percentage of our people is beginning to pay off for us, and it's beginning to be protective for some of our people. So we'll get more into the weeds on that. As far as the LA County region, dire is a good description. It is a humanitarian disaster. And it's funny, it's weird because people still come up to me and ask me if it's real. When the numbers get published that we have 0% capacity in our ICU, that is wrong. We have a big negative number in terms of capacity for ICU beds in our system. When they give us 0% capacity, it doesn't even begin to count the number of people in ERs and other places that are waiting for days and days and days to get an ICU bed to go available. And often the only way we get an ICU bed available is when a patient passes away. At my old hospital, their morgue is full. Their freezer truck is double full, meaning that the bodies are stacked in twos, and they can't get any mortuaries to take the patients because the mortuaries are saturated.
Dr. Kazan, what was your old hospital?
St. Francis
Okay.
in Linwood. So it is still of epic proportions. And while I know when we deliver a patient to the hospital in the EMS world, and we go away, we don't necessarily, we might deliver someone, you look and go, they don't look that sick, but in the time that they're going to be in the hospital, they get sick and pass away. And I've never seen so many code blues in the hospital. My wife is a hospital pharmacist. She has never seen code blues like this. And the number of cardiac arrests that we've responded to last month was 40% higher in December than in any month in the history of the department. So I think that says a lot. Our folks are really tired out there. They're seeing a lot of really sick people and a lot of death. So we have hope on the horizon. I think we're probably going to get worse before we get better, but I do think that by the end of the month, we'll begin to see things start to recede a little bit.
So that's kind of, and that seems to kind of echo what I've been hearing is kind of the next 30 days are going to be critical. Don't take it like, I've kind of heard it described as you're in a plateau in the surge, but the surge isn't done yet. Is that somewhat accurate in the description?
I hope it's a plateau. So we really haven't seen the effect of Christmas and New Year's gatherings yet. Those people are now getting sick and turning positive, but they don't really get sick to hit the hospital until week 2. So week 2 begins, kind of this weekend into next week. If we surge at that point, then we'll know we're kind of a peak on top of a peak. We've also been really blessed. We're not really seeing influenza cases right now. That luck will eventually turn. So hopefully that the influenza surge doesn't hit us while we're still surging with COVID. Hopefully, as we begin to recede and flu picks up, we still maintain some capacity. But it's rough out there.
Got it. And I'm gonna go over to Mike Fine, Dr. Mackey. Mike, you got it.
Hey, Dr. Mackey, if you could just kind of follow up, same thing, give us a little bit about what's going on in Sacramento County area, as well as what you've seen, and if you could touch on a little bit what you're seeing with some of your members that have gotten COVID and how their recovery is going.
Sure, thank you. So we have had about 12.5% of our members in Sacramento County become infected with COVID. As Dr. Kazan alluded to, that it is variable about who ends up in an ICU, who ends up. There's no predictability to that, it seems. We do have one member that was featured on our local news as a 41-year-old who's been with the fire department for 11 years. I actually know him really well. He spent 6 weeks off. He spent a few days in the hospital. He still has not returned to duty. His biggest hit was on his respiratory system. He said just to walk to the end of his driveway was a chore. And so he's currently in pulmonary rehab at one of our local hospitals. But this is a story that plays out over and over and over again. We've had several members that are hospitalized. We are fortunate we have not lost a member yet, but they all have family members or close loved ones that they know of that have been hit by this virus. It is dire up here as well, as Dr. Kazan had said. And what probably most people don't realize is that an average hospital stay for all comers, say stroke, heart attack, whatever, ranges in the 3 to 5 day range. And when someone gets hospitalized with COVID, and especially when they go to the intensive care unit, we're out at weeks of hospitalization, and those people end up staying in the hospital for longer periods of time. Bed availability gets drained, and then that spills over into the emergency department, which creates long wall times as we're standing on the walls in the emergency department. And so although many folks on this call are frustrated by their local systems, probably because they have long wall times, the hospitals are in a concerted effort. But just like we are feeling overwhelmed, they are equally overwhelmed. And so we're kind of all in this together.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Mackey. Appreciate it. Next kind of question, and I'm going to throw this up to Dr. Benson, and maybe you can answer, and if one of the other doctors would like to chime in too. There's been a lot of information regarding the COVID vaccine out there, and sometimes it's making it pretty difficult to tell fact from fiction and what's going on. Can you tell us a little bit about the science behind the vaccine and some of the mRNA technology that's being used?
Yeah, I think the first thing that's important to say is that a lot of folks, myself included initially, believed that, boy, how could you make something so quickly and do it with any quality and make sure you got it right. And really this technology replaced a lot of the previous older technology, which just took a long time, whether you were culturing it in an egg or just working on developing an antigen. It took months and years at times. What the mRNA did was allowed us to create the ability to develop an antigen much faster. And that mRNA basically went from, instead of sending the antigen into the body as a vaccine and get the antigen in and have the immune system respond to that like a typical, say, flu vaccine, what the mRNA does is it kind of builds that antigen on site. So it gets into the cell, it releases some mRNA, which goes out and generates this antigen, which then gets to the immune system. So it's very simple. Even though it's an mRNA vaccine and people get concerned about it, they worry about the genetic issues, it's a very simple vaccine. And perhaps the most reassuring part about it is that RNA is dissolved within 24 hours. So a lot of folks think it's going to get into the system and circulate in the body and cause problems and side effects downstream. But this RNA it will create the antigen, allow the immune system to now be responsive to a COVID infection if it occurs down the road, and that RNA is all gone, and it's basically a very simple process, despite the sort of science fiction sound of an mRNA vaccine. I know Dr. Mackey has some other ideas on it. He can probably fill in some of the other details as well. He's real up on the science of it.
Is it okay if I just do a quick screen share?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let me start the presentation here, and so that it looks right on everybody's screen. So everyone knows that the two leading developers out there so far are Pfizer and Moderna. And I want to point out, like Dr. Benson had said, these are called third generation vaccines. And as he alluded to, influenza is grown in like egg cultures, the influenza vaccine, and it takes months to be able to grow enough vaccine in enough numbers. And for this vaccine, we're talking about having to produce billions of doses. In the history of our world, we've never had to produce 1 billion doses of any one vaccine. And this has to be a very fast and efficient process. So these are called third generation vaccines. And at the bottom line here is what we need to do is to educate our immune system. If you have a pneumonia or urinary tract infection, we can treat that with antibiotics. However, you can't treat a pandemic that's caused by a virus with antibiotics. They just don't exist. So you need a vaccine because the vaccine needs to teach our immune system how to build immunity. So these are how the vaccines actually work. I'm just a big Matrix fan. And so I want to walk you through actually how they develop this. So this is the coronavirus, and what we're interested in is this spike protein. And what the researchers were able to do is to sequence the genome of coronavirus very early on, and they looked for that small red squiggly part, which is what encoded that spike protein, and they pulled it out and they isolated it. And after they isolated it in a lab, they can make millions of copies of it, and then they can package it in a vehicle that can then be administered through a vaccine that can readily cross our cells and enter our cells and begin to teach our immune system how it works. And this is basically how it works. These two small rocks you kind of see sitting on top of each other called ribosomes. You can think of those as like the copy machine of our cell. They take mRNA and they recognize what the code is, and out of the code they make the protein that's being told to make. So the vaccine instills the mRNA from the spike protein into our cell, and we start to produce just spike proteins. That is really key in take home because there is no live virus in any part of this vaccine. There's only the mRNA that produces the spike protein. So when those spike proteins get released, they have to go into our immune system, and this is where the education starts. They get absorbed by some cells, and those cells then digest this protein and they present them on the surface, and they start to sound an alarm that says that there's a foreign body present. And that foreign body gets presented to this helper T cell, which you can consider the educator of our immune system, teaches our immune system what to look for. And the helper T cell comes alongside these macrophages or antigen presenting cells and says, oh, hey dude, you don't belong here. I'm gonna go looking for you. And so it memorizes what this looks like, and then it goes and teaches the army of our immune system, which are the B cells, what to look for. And then the B cells go, okay, now I know what to go look for. And they start producing antibodies, and the antibodies are what go out, track down, disable, and kill the virus. So in a bottom line is these vaccines are an efficient way for our immune system to basically go to school and learn what this thing looks like and then go out and kill it. And I'm going to stop there because I know there's going to be questions later about herd immunity, and I've got a good graphic right after this for herd immunity, but I'll stop there and I'll come back in when we're ready for that.
I'm just going to hit a couple of quick points on top of Kevin's. By the way, I wish Kevin taught my immunology class in med school. But no, the couple of quick points are messenger RNA that is for just a small piece of that spike protein. It does not enter the cell nucleus. It does not touch your cellular DNA. It does not change your cellular DNA. Your cells make messenger RNA constantly throughout your body. The molecules are relatively unstable, and so they disappear in about 24 hours. Your body metabolizes them back into their pieces and then recycles them and uses them later. So, but those are some key questions that come up about this vaccine. The science is actually really simple, like Kevin described. Pulling it off is difficult. That's why it took a long time to bring one all the way to development. But this is not new in that they have been working on doing just this for more than 25 years.
And I'll just add that, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Benson.
I was just going to add that one other thing that was somewhat reassuring for me as well was the fact that these mRNA type vaccines, this is not the first one we've seen. There was some rabies vaccines comprising several hundred people, which was 3 or 4 years ago. And those people have, you know, if you're concerned about things like long-term effects, we now have some years of experience behind us of other mRNA uses, whether it's in a cancer vaccine or in a rabies vaccine, and there was even a flu vaccine that was tested with that. And the fact that we can now look at the outcomes of those folks several years later, and see that no surprising side effects have developed is very reassuring.
And this is a little bit of a statement, but then I want to turn this back over to the three doctors. One is Dr. Mackey. I know that we can probably get a copy of your PowerPoint presentation. That is definitely something, and we might already have it, that we would get up on our COVID information site. Probably the biggest one here before I kind of step away and turn this over to Mike and the membership We know that there are firefighters out there that are very hesitant to getting the vaccine for a myriad of reasons, which I will be respectful of all of them. And if you could just give a message to the firefighters that you serve as our medical directors and watching over and out for us about this vaccine, what would it be? And I'll start with Dr. Mackey, then Kazan, and Dr. Benson, I'll let you close up. Because that's kind of the whole goal of this is if we can see and ease the minds of some of our firefighters, what would you tell them? You have direct access to a lot of people right now. Dr.
Absolutely. Thank you, President Rice. I am in the same camp with you. This is a personal choice, and I respect their personal choice, but this is much bigger than a personal choice. So we are all in the business of public service. And although this vaccine will protect you and ultimately protect your brothers and sisters in the fire service from when it gets into a firehouse or you go on a call and you're exposed to it, it also protects our community as well. And as I alluded to, the only way to get out in front of a pandemic is to build enough immunity in the community. That's it. There is no other way. In current technology, there's no other way. And this is the only way, is to build immunity. And I've had several firefighters ask me the question, well, I've had COVID-19, don't I have immunity? And the answer to that is yes. We don't know how long. Some of the numbers that you'll hear talked about is at least 90 days, there's an immune protection. But the question then becomes, is the vigor or the strength of the immune response comparing someone who's had COVID-19 versus someone who's had the vaccine, and then how long the memory of that response lasts? And what we know is that the people who get the vaccine compared to those who've just been infected with COVID-19 have a much more vigorous, much stronger, much more effective, much more efficient response to COVID-19 when and if they encounter it. And the memory appears, if it's consistent with prior vaccine technology, the memory of that response is going to be considerably longer than if you've just had the disease once. So that would be what I would tell the members.
Dr. Kazan?
Thank you. I would echo what Kevin said, that it is a personal decision about whether people want to receive a vaccine or not. And as much as I am a very strong advocate of vaccines, I also recognize that this is a vaccine that does not yet have full FDA approval, and it is relatively new out there. The reason I trust the science is because vaccines themselves are not new. The first vaccine was in 1797. The first time, by the way, that the US government, well, sort of, or a fraction of the US government mandated an inoculation was during the Revolutionary War in Washington's army against smallpox. So this is not new. The vaccines are the reason why we have a life expectancy of 80 years. Yes, it's cancer treatment and diabetes treatment and heart disease treatment and stuff. Very true. But the reason why we tend to live a long time is we don't die of all the childhood diseases that we used to die from. Most of you, I'm sure, have never seen a case of active polio, measles, things like that, because we just hardly ever see them anymore. What I would say is, for most people, they describe and they'll say, I'm really not afraid of this because 99.8% of people survive this anyway, so why do I need a vaccine? Well, 99.8% is not the correct number. So far, the mortality is somewhere, about 2%. We think it's going to settle in overall, probably in the 0.5 to 1.5% range. And yes, it's more in the older population and the chronically infirmed and less in the younger populations. But remember, even at 0.2%, there are about 100 million people in that 20 to 40 age range, and 0.2% is 200,000 people that will die. And that's more than any Civil War battle. I mean, just imagine if you could do something to reduce that number by 95%. Wouldn't you want to do that? So I trust vaccines in general. I trust the science that's behind them. And the last thing I will say is, while it may not affect you, what we see is that it affects the people that you inadvertently infect. We have seen as many as 15 of our members get infected from a single person. And then those people go off and infect other people and infect other people. And some of those people will not fare well. Many of the people that come to my emergency department that are never going to leave have no idea how they came into contact with the virus. They were being so careful, and yet they have it, and it's now too late. So remember, it's not just a personal choice for you. For this to work for us, and I think Kevin's going to talk about herd immunity in a little bit, but herd immunity has never occurred without a vaccine. If we're going to get there as a community, we have to take some community responsibility, and we have to jump in and do this to protect those around us. So our family members, our friends, our other members of our community, our patients, because we're also all healthcare workers. We have a duty and an obligation to protect our patients from any disease that we can inadvertently spread to them. So that's why I believe so strongly. But I do respect personal choice. I just want to make sure that people are basing their decisions on good information, not just what's being streamed out so widely in social media. Thanks, Brian.
Dr. Benson, I'm going to have you close up, and Mike will go directly to you.
Yeah, I'll just add, I agree with everything that was stated. Frankly, one dead firefighter or dead firefighter's family or kid or grandparent or coworker is one too many. And we've already seen one too many. And it's time to stop this. The vaccines are way out of this.
Well, good. Thank you. Next question to each of you. And I'm going to go to Dr. Kazan this time. You can start it out for us. But I mean, you kind of talked about where we are right now, but what do the next few months look like for the state in terms of COVID spread? And again, we've talked a little bit about it already, but how important is the vaccination to ending this pandemic?
You know, I hate to do this to Kevin, but Kevin, can I pass to you to talk about herd immunity? And I'll hit a quick point, and then I want to pass to Kevin because I think he has a graphic he wants to share. The best way that we can reduce the spread around the community is the number of people that are susceptible to it, because it has to spread from human to human. It doesn't live on surfaces very long. The predominant way it spreads is proximity and time. So if we can, the people that are coming into contact with infected people, if they themselves are not susceptible to it, then the virus will die in that individual when they recover and doesn't spread. We consider that the R value, which is the number of people each infected person infects. Once we can get that R value below 1, every person that gets infected infects less than one other person, and then we begin to see that decline. And so the quickest way to get there is a vaccine. If we allow it to go through our community and just rip through society like it is in California, and in particular Los Angeles right now, the problem with that is, number one, you're going to get a lot of unnecessary death that's going to occur. Not just because people got infected who didn't need to get infected, but also because the healthcare system is overly taxed right now and people can't get the level of care that they need to get. That's number one. But number two, the immunity does not appear to last. We've seen many of our own department, well over a dozen, get reinfected. So you can't, the people that become immune, the immunity disappears, and then they just jump right back in the bucket of susceptible people again. And it's just going to keep going through in waves until we can get enough people immune. And then can I pass to Kevin for herd immunity?
That's perfect.
Yeah, this will just take a second. Everyone can see that, I imagine. So let's imagine in the middle of this, there's one person, that's the red dot that comes down with the virus. And then if we know, as that person has contact with people around them, this will slowly spread and spread and spread, as we've seen through our community. But let's take that same person again, and let's say that we have several members of our society that have gotten the vaccine, represented here by the blue circles. Is that person would potentially infect those people around them, which that person most certainly will. More people around them start to get the vaccine, and it becomes more difficult for that virus to begin to spread through the community. But let's say, like, maybe another person over in another segment of our community comes down with the virus, but they're already surrounded by people who've had the vaccine, and the spread essentially comes to a grinding halt. So this is what the picture of herd immunity looks like. You're caging off the virus with enough people in the community that eventually have got immunity so it cannot spread. So that's just a very quick graphic about herd immunity.
Thanks, Dr. Mackey. Dr. Benson, was there anything that you had to add to that, or you?
No, it's very, very well depicted.
Okay, and now I guess we'll throw it back to Brian.
Dr. Mackey and Kazan and Benson, thank you. And I know that some of this is going to be repetitive. That's okay, because firefighters are like athletes. When we feel, it's about muscle memory and it's about repetitive motion. So please don't anybody feel like we're in a repetitive zone. We all need to hear it. And we're at a spot where I'm going to turn this over to Mike in a minute and the audience. If you are one of the participants, which it looks like we have a nice crowd of over 300, now is your chance to type your question into the Q&A box, put your name, your local, and your department in. And I know that we invited Cal Chiefs and Metro Chiefs, so you just want to put your department name in, that's fine also. And it's going to be really important, name, local, department, name, department, that we get to your questions. And at this point in the queue, I am going to turn it over to Mike Fye, but I do want to tell you something that developed with me just this morning. A firefighter that I knew my entire career in Sacramento, we worked as partners on the truck. He was on the other jump seat. And then when I became a captain, he was my firefighter for many, many years in Rio Linda. And I found out by accident yesterday that Jeff has COVID. And I talked to him this morning, and it was heartbreaking. This is not a guy that, this is a guy who's an avid fly fisherman, duck hunter, owns a dirt race car and dirt track NASCAR with Lucas Oil. This is an active, healthy man that's my age, 60 years old. He's been there for 2 weeks. He may get out this weekend. He cannot go from his hospital bed to the bathroom without a walker. And it broke my heart to hear him talk in those 3 to 4, maybe a 5-word sentence. And he said, Brian, I know exactly I know what those acute COPDers that we went on calls to all those years, I know the panic and what they're feeling right now. So this is real. And with that, if you're thinking about a vaccine, you need to make it real for yourself, because it is, and it just like Dr. Kazan said, it isn't about you. It's about all those around you. And we raised our hand and we took an oath. And it's kind of like a marriage. It's for good and for bad. Well, guess what? This is the bad. Let's get vaccinated and let's do our part in the community. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you for the Q&A. Thank you.
And we're going to get started on the Q&A. And just, I'd like to add something too. I know a lot of this discussion over the last, 9 months and stuff has revolved around, it seems like it's becoming negative. I think we need to really be optimistic. I think some of the vaccine technology and everything that's been used to get us to where we are now, I mean, it's a very hopeful time. I think we're starting to leverage some of the technology that we have available to us, and we're putting it to use to benefit our community as a whole. And I get concerned that everybody's very hesitant to take this vaccine, but again, I keep trying to push out the good message that, hey, we're in a great time to be able to do this and get this out to people and move it forward as fastly as we have. So again, thank you all, and we're going to get started. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to start with Dr. Mackey. The first question we have here is from Adam Van Gerpen. He's out at LA City, UFLAC Local 112. And his question is, how many other departments seen an increase in post-COVID members who are having night terrors and delusional psychosis? We're seeing a correlation with members who have lost taste and smelling because it seems to affect their nervous system and crosses the neural barrier.
That's a great question, and I promised before we got on here, if I didn't know the exact answer, that I would tell you I don't know the exact answer, and so this will be one of those. I'm not sure if I know the exact answer to the night terrors. I do know that post-COVID infection does have an impact on the neurologic system. We're starting to see reports come out of the CDC about the possibility of accelerated dementia as well, but I'll kick it over to my two colleagues. They may have information on that.
Peter, do you want to start with this one? Or I can go.
I think the key thing here is that, excuse me, the ACE receptors really involve all your organs. This virus is wreaking havoc on all. There's also a component of just mentally related illness, just related to the actual stress involved with this, the pandemic, the lockdowns. But there clearly is some impact on the nervous system, as Dr. Mackey pointed out. We don't totally understand the science just yet, whether it's a low-grade encephalitis, low-grade inflammation, but we do know that the virus has the capability to get into just about every organ and wreak havoc, so to speak. I think we're still waiting to get some better understanding through studies, looking at treatments. Do steroids impact this positively or not? What other potential treatments there are? But this is a big challenge, and it's clearly one of the worrisome side effects from COVID. Clayton?
Yeah. Sorry, I've been answering questions in the chat as well. The neurologic side effects of this are weird. Like, it's just, I guess I kind of go back to my earlier point, which is this is inflammatory. It's not just respiratory. I know that most of the people who experience really mild symptoms is predominantly respiratory, but what this does to the body is really unusual. And I know that people like to they compare it to flu. Like, this is 2 times the mortality of flu, or and it's because people understand the flu, they've experienced it, and it's something that they can picture in their mind. But this one is really different. Example that we send off all these inflammatory labs, ferritin and CRP and these other things, and they all skyrocket in these patients. That does not happen from influenza, adenovirus, chickenpox, or any of these other viruses. It's a very unique thing to COVID-19. It causes this massive inflammation, clotting, strokes, heart attacks. I had someone the other day that I thought may have hyperthyroidism, and my assistant medical director was like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Never even heard of it, but it's thyroiditis, pericarditis, myocarditis, or all kinds of organ dysfunction. And the neurologic, we've seen sleep disturbance for sure. I did hear about psychosis and delusions. I learned about it from Local 112 yesterday and their experience. That was new to me. And I talked about it to my colleagues in the ER last night. And they all said the same thing, like, oh yeah, we've seen some of that already. And those patients that had normal CTs, normal MRIs, normal spinal taps, which means it may just be something in their brain chemistry that is something that we can't detect with our tests. Just like if you do imaging on a patient with schizophrenia, you don't really see anything different. But we're going to learn about all kinds of crazy side effects from this for a long time to come. That's part of the reason why we tell people, I don't want to preach paranoia, but I do tell people you need to do what you can to avoid getting this. If you get it, you get it, and we're going to help you. But don't be cavalier about it. This is not something that you want. So make sure you're getting information from good sources.
All right. Hey, thanks, Dr. Kazan. And I'm going to throw this one at you. We'll start with you. Dane Ward out of Pasadena Fire, Local 809. So in coffee table talks with members of my department regards to this vaccine, one concern is that there is a question or misinformation that this vaccine is developed using aborted fetuses. Can you explain this if it's true?
Okay. Yes, I can explain it, and I know where it came from. The Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine were entirely synthesized in the lab. They did not use any fetal tissue. They were not tested on fetal tissue. It is entirely lab synthesized. Where this comes from is in the AstraZeneca study. The AstraZeneca study uses monkey adenovirus. That's where you hear the term monkey DNA as well. It's not monkey DNA, it's adenovirus DNA. And what they did, instead of using messenger RNA, is they inserted the spike protein into the DNA of this adenovirus that's been fully sequenced. Adenovirus has evolved over millions of years to infect humans. And the way it does is it goes into your cell, puts its DNA in there, and reprograms your cell to produce adenoviruses instead of the usual cell proteins. And then eventually the adenoviruses burst out and go infect other cells. So they've sequenced this adenovirus, they've cleaved off the pieces of DNA that cause it to be dangerous in any way, and inserted the spike protein. Then what happens is it goes in, inserts spike protein in your DNA, which is where people say that the vaccines change your DNA. That's from this, not from Moderna or Pfizer. That's from the AstraZeneca study, and gets your cells to produce spike protein. And then the same cascade happens where your immune system then recognizes it. So in the AstraZeneca study, there was a university in England that took some of the vaccine and did test it on human fetal cell lines that to see whether it affected the infectivity of those cells and of the coronavirus. But the vaccine itself contains no fetal cell tissues. There is no fetal DNA in the vaccine. And that one, does it change the DNA for the cell permanently? In the cells that it interacts with, yes, but your human muscle cells are constantly turning over too. So it does it in a similar fashion to that the messenger RNA vaccines do to produce an immune response. But adenoviruses infect human beings all the time. You all have been infected with adenoviruses. If you were to find the right cells, you could probably detect adenoviral DNA in your cells already from past infections. So it's again, like I said, a lot of the stuff, it's a kernel of truth that's really twisted around to fit a narrative that is just, it's actually nonsensical. So that's where it comes from, but that's the long answer. The short answer is no fetal cell tissue in either of these two vaccines, and the Vatican has actually come out and said that they're in favor of all of the vaccines.
All right, thank you. We're going to go down next question, and I'm going to throw this one at Dr. Mackey, and why are healthy people, and this is from Steve Suter, I don't know where he's from, but why are healthy people ending up in the ICU when others are not? Are there different strains like the UK strain that have not been identified, causing some to get more sick, or are there other identifiable factors?
Great question. So why people end up in ICUs has everything to do with the intensity of the immune response. So the virus itself, as it replicates itself millions of times, creates a gigantic inflammatory response, which is what ultimately leads to the severe respiratory syndromes that we're seeing. But as Dr. Benson and Dr. Kazan had said, that there's other things like possibly encephalitis, but definitely vasculitis, cardiovascular effects. So, but you can't like, there's no predictability that is at least known in today's science about who is going to end up in an ICU and who's not going to end up in ICU. But I'm glad someone asked a question about the new cell lines, because that seems to be alarming, and it's like a novel thing for viruses to have new cell lines, but it actually is historical. This is what viruses do. Is you make millions and billions of copies of yourself every now and then. The genome will change just a little bit, and one of those changes may not be advantageous, and you might start to see virus start to disappear. But sometimes it's advantageous, meaning that it helps it in some way. And the strains that we're seeing in Great Britain, and if you've been reading a little bit about South Africa too, along the coastline in South Africa, there appears to be new strains. And they appear to be more infective. In other words, they're just more effective. So as Dr. Benson talked about these ACE receptors, think of that as the lock on the membrane of your cell. And these spike proteins are the key that opens the lock that gets the virus into your cell. These new strains have just a little bit better key that fit the lock just a little bit better, that make it more infective and maybe able to infect people more readily. And probably the scariest thing about this, at least maybe not the scariest thing, it's just a fact, is that it appears to be infecting people who are a little bit younger, so 20 years and younger. But when you read that in the science, you have to really pause for just a second and know that the virus is not asking for people's identification before it infects it. So it's not picking people who are 20 years and younger. It could be that some of these folks are gathering in the larger gatherings and tend to be more in crowds than other people. But take-home lesson is that yes, there are new strains. It's not new. Some of these strains are going to be advantageous and be more effective, which is why it is so important that we get vaccinated and get in front of this thing as quick as we can.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Mackey. We're going to go down to Randy Burns, local 798. His question, he worries about his children the most. What are the statistics on children contracting the virus from what you've seen thus far? And Dr. Benson, if you want to give it a shot, or anybody who might know the statistics.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a parent myself, that was something I was obviously also very sensitive to. And you also worry about kids just letting their guard down, whether they're going to school doing their best or whether they're teenagers and just doing their worst. The bottom line is, so far, the current numbers show there's only been about 1,300 cases reported nationally, which, considering how prevalent this is, that's a relatively reassuring number. 23 of them have actually died from it. When it does occur, it can be severe. It's this multi-system inflammatory syndrome. It causes inflammation of the vessels, typical things that COVID causes. But the good news is that we've been blessed in that this is quite rare, and fortunately, we've got that on our side.
All right, thank you. Dr. Kazan, I'm going to throw this one at you. And we kind of answered the first part of the question, which spoke to the, different strains and stuff like that. So the second part of the question was, after firefighters received the second dose of the vaccine, should they be getting an antibody test at some sort of interval afterwards to help confirm immunity? And that question is from John Bagla out of Marin, local 1775.
It's a good question. The answer is we don't really know yet. I've seen just on social media people posting the little finger stick antibody tests and seeing IgG antibodies against the coronavirus after getting the vaccine. But just remember that antibody titers are just one part of the story and whether or not you have immunity. The cell-mediated immunity that Kevin was describing is something that doesn't show up in an antibody titer. What's going to happen, I think, over time is that research institutions, the vaccine companies, but also the universities are going to be following people for evidence, particularly because antibodies are easier to measure, but to see what happens to people's antibodies over time in order to help determine whether a booster shot might be necessary at some future point. As of right now, they're both 2-dose regimens, and then that's all we know at this point. Will it become an annual flu shot or something like that? It's possible, but we just don't know yet.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Mackey, I was going to throw this next question at you, and it just disappeared. I think you answered it online. So.
Oh, dang it! I'm so sorry, and I didn't realize that I would do that. I was trying to keep up with Clayton because he's so fast at this.
So I actually think
answer it if you like.
Yeah,
I
that would
think
be helpful.
some redundancy is good, but we're answering in the chat. For those of you who want to read the chat, we're trying to answer there too. But yeah, by all means, we'll answer live as well.
But it seems they disappeared, so I
Yes.
didn't realize that. So sorry about that.
Problem. So
Yeah,
if you could answer that question, Dr. Mackey, that would be great.
Yes, sir. So the question came: if I've had the virus before, why do I need a vaccine? Don't I have some sort of immune protection, and how long does that last? And the answer to that is, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, that it appears that the strength of the immune response to COVID-19 doesn't last. And that's evidenced in the fact, as Dr. Kazan pointed out, several of his members and several of my members have actually had COVID 2 times, and Lord help us, even 3. And the scariest part about it is when you get the infection subsequently, it seems to be a little stronger. So with the vaccine, the strength of the immediate immune response and the durability of the response is considerably longer with the vaccine. So even if you've had COVID-19 in the past, you should be vaccinated. That is my recommendation to the members in Sacramento. The other thing I wanted to say about that is, how long do I have to wait if I've had the infection before I can get the vaccine? And the recommendation is 14 days. So 2 weeks before you get the vaccine.
Right, thank you. Stephen Hayes out of Gilroy, local 2805, and I'm going to throw this at Dr. Benson. Will family members of public safety be in a higher tier for the vaccine? Our job by its nature puts our families at greater risk. Once we complete the second vaccine, can we still be a carrier to our family members?
Yeah, great question. So number one, let me pull up question up again. Who was that from again? I apologize. This thing's scrolling it without me touching it.
From Justin Reyes out of local 2606
Got
in
it.
Miami.
Okay, the blood typing? No.
Oh no, I'm in the same boat as you. My screen is moving so quickly.
Yeah, you want to just say the question again, the first half? I'll give it a try. If you could find it.
It disappeared.
There was the carrier state. Maybe someone answered it already in the.
So
I'm gonna follow my sword on this one. I didn't realize the questions were disappearing. Oh, I think they're still there if you go back to if you click the answered tab. I didn't realize they were disappearing when I answered them. I'm sorry.
This kind of speaks to, we have three very solid overachievers here. And, number one, I commend you on that. But I know that there's going to be a couple of questions in there. But as you get out of that, I want to go back on one thing, Mike, if I may. And that is, we know that members get sick with it, but there are also other potential lasting health problems. We know why. Is there any indicators of who might be susceptible to that, or is it just part of the great unknown with the SARS-CoV-19? And also,
did I step on you? I can say anecdotally that those who have the most sort of residual lung symptoms, the dyspnea, the decreased exertion or exercise ability, seem to be those who experienced a pretty profound inflammatory and symptomatic experience when they do get sick. They're not the ones who get a little bit of a runny nose, maybe a little achy, and just sort of have what we call the upper respiratory symptoms. Those seem to be more likely those who develop what we call lower tract symptoms, where there is some COVID pneumonia, some dyspnea that's more part of the acute presentation with a cough and other symptoms. And we can also ask that of the other panelists. That's probably their experience as well.
Yeah, I would echo what Peter said. Absolutely. The question also had to do with around a carrier state, I believe, if I remember correctly, Mike. So this is a really important take-home point, and that is the fact that just because you get the vaccine does not mean that you won't get COVID-19. That's really important. So in the larger trial that was in Pfizer, even after the second dose, 11 people were infected with COVID, and in the placebo arm, there was 180 that became infected with COVID. So you're looking at numbers, big number difference. But here is the take-home point, and what I really want to make sure everyone hears. That is the fact that a vaccine, at the end of the day, was ultimately never designed to keep everybody from staying well, from getting sick, designed to keep them well. Some people, even though they've had the vaccine, will still potentially get COVID-19, although the numbers will be considerably smaller. The key is a vaccine is designed to keep you alive. It prevents the severe long-term effects that happen with these kinds of infections. And so the vaccine is designed to keep you healthy long-term, even though very, very few people will still get COVID-19, even if they've had the vaccine. So carrier state, don't know that it really exists. We're still learning about that. If you wanted to find a carrier state, it's that honeymoon phase between when they become ultimately infected and start producing virus, but don't become symptomatic. So the so-called asymptomatic spreaders. And as I woke up this morning and did my morning routine of going through all my emails like we all do, I came across a CDC report out of the South African and the British new strains, and it appears that the asymptomatic spread rate is considerably higher with those two strains.
I'm going to throw this one at Dr. Kazan. It's out of George Dorado out of local 145 in San Diego City. And he's asking, face mask compliance amongst firefighters while in the station seems to be spotty, likely in part due to the politicization of the issue. Have any of your departments been successful in promoting widespread mask acceptance in terms of encouraging mask compliance what best practices do you recommend?
Wow, that's a really great question and a tough question. Sometimes when I go visit a station, I've never seen people so fast go run and scatter to find a mask. The politicization of this is really, really unfortunate because it kind of left us doctors in a bind. And actually, the way that social media has taken it, that it makes it look like doctors cannot agree on what best practice is. That is absolutely not true. When you look at the major medical professional societies, they are completely aligned. What happens though is you get some doctors that have an alternate view on what should happen that may or may not be based in anything scientific, but because of the social media age, they're able to be put up on a platform and they get a million hits. And it looks like there's this dissent in the ranks that really doesn't exist. Almost all of us are pretty closely aligned with very, very little difference. So unfortunately, that has led to people feeling more empowered that facial coverings and distancing, that's not settled science. It is settled science. Wearing a mask reduces transmission. By 100%? No. But does it reduce it? Yes. Does physical distancing reduce transmission? Yes, it does. But unfortunately, we're competing against a social media monster that's very, very hard to compete against. And honestly, having watched a lot of these videos that people keep sending me, I kind of understand. I'm dull by comparison. Some of these are really like, these people are super animated and passionate, but passion doesn't mean accurate or scientific or correct. So I wish I could say that we had great compliance in our department, but I have to play mask police sometimes when I come in and ask people to put their masks on. And I understand why they feel the way that they do, and I understand how uncomfortable it is to wear it for such extended periods of time. But we are at least blessed to live in California, where we tend to have good weather even in the winter. At least many of our locals experience that. And when you need a break, go outside and take a breath of fresh air. It's all good. So yeah, it's challenging. I don't think that punitive paths are the best way to do it. But the best thing I think is for all of our leadership, both in the executive teams and in the chief level and in the leaders in the stations, to demonstrate good behavior, to lead by example. That's the best thing that we can do, and hope that people will follow.
Okay, and Dr. Benson, I'm going to throw this one at you because it's from, again, up in your area. John Bagla is asking, given the physical stresses of firefighting and the fact that we need to wear SCBAs, can you speak to what follow-up tests you believe are the most important for our members, either those that have had the virus or multiple exposures at our annual physical? Should we be getting chest x-rays, pulmonary function, spirometry, or particular blood panel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll give you some insight, and then we can get the opinions of the rest of the group. So a chest X-ray at this point is probably a low sensitivity test, and for our folks, I would want them to get something more definitive. A CAT scan of the chest at the very least will be helpful for those who are having pulmonary symptoms. Pulmonary function tests as well are helpful. Those can help determine their overall function, and if it's decreased, they generally get that regularly, so getting another one to determine if there's been any deterioration is helpful to document. And then you got to make sure you hit the cardiac side of things. So whether that's a stress echo or a nuclear study, some type of evaluation of cardiac output and cardiac function is also important. So I think those are the two major systems you want to hit. And those are some of the more easily accessible tests. And I'd like to hear what Kazan and Mackey have to say.
Dr. Mackey, you want to go?
Sure. So if you've returned to baseline and you don't have any exertional symptoms and you don't seem to be impacted and you're able to have the same exercise tolerance that you had prior to COVID, I'm not sure that there's any broad scale testing that's required for you. But if you are sensing that there is a problem, then I think Peter's on the right track. I think pulmonary function tests certainly are warranted and the easiest, lowest hanging fruit. And then some sort of exercise or pulmonary rehab, walking on a treadmill. If you guys search on Google for the Sacramento firefighter, and it's on a KCRI website, they did a 2.5-minute story on him, and they talked about his pulmonary rehab program. And you can actually see some of the things they do. But I want to remind you guys that he was hospitalized and is still off work. So this is going to be an extreme case. I don't think that the entire fire service needs to put all of their personnel through a lot of tests in the post-COVID process unless they are still not able to return to baseline after known infection. That would be my advice. And I don't know how you feel. Do you agree with that, Clayton?
Yes, I agree. It'll be interesting when people come up for their annual physical exams and they get on the treadmill and stuff. Do we start to see things that were not apparent to us? But for the most part, especially with 900, I think we're 945 right now. We don't have the capacity to get that level of testing with all of them. So if they feel like they're back to normal, their exercise tolerance is back to normal, and they're not really having any other symptoms, I think it's fine to have them just notify us if things change. We've been working with UCLA about the possibility of doing more detailed work on people that may have myocarditis or more issues with their pulmonary system, but it's still kind of up in the air what our long-term effects are going to be. And someone had asked that in one of the questions that I probably made disappear. This is just still too early. We can't tell what's going to happen a year or 2 years out from getting the infection because we haven't known about it that long. I will say we're being a big department. We're blessed. We have an exercise physiologist who, for our folks that are returning back to work, has helped them to kind of recondition. And they've actually been very, very pleased with that. And it's a surprisingly not that rigorous exercise program. It's much more based upon resting heart rate and heart rate with exertion than it is upon, just putting the treadmill at infinity and going as hard as you can. The last thing I will say to that is I got great advice from one of my assistant medical directors on this, to treat it more like a sprain. That when you sprain your ankle really bad, when you get up too quickly and try and walk on it, it just gets worse. So you have to let it heal to a point where you've really turned the corner and it really is mostly better, and then begin to increase your exertion on it. But if you do it too quickly, it has actually a counter effect. So, and then hopefully we see a lot of these side effects that last a while still gradually abate.
Dr. Kazan, before you go, I have a question, and it's from Gary, and I'm going to mess his last name up, Izquierdo, out of LAFD Local 112. And he's asking, does the vaccine have an adjuvant? And if it does, is it aluminum based?
So good question. Neither the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine has any preservative in it at all. It's actually part of the reason why it's so hard to store. The AstraZeneca one and Johnson & Johnson that are in the pipeline, I don't know about those. Those are still probably at minimum weeks away, if not even a couple of months away from approval. But neither the Pfizer nor the Moderna vaccine has anything in it apart from messenger RNA and the lipid molecules.
Yeah, and then the only other thing to add would be that polyethylene glycol part that has had some allergic reactions to it, but certainly no aluminum as per the question.
Perfect, thank you. We're going to go back up and we're going to hit this one. You guys have kind of tap danced around. I'm going to go to Dr. Mackey to start this. Is there any talk about potential time frame on when a vaccinated person may be able to discontinue wearing a mask? Additionally, if 3 or 4 firefighters riding in the same rig are vaccinated, do they need to still wear masks in the cab or the station they are assigned to?
Yeah, I get asked this question probably every day, as I'm sure Dr. Benson and Dr. Kazan does. When can we get rid of these things? So I'm happy to get the question, because that means that they're actually wearing their masks, and so they're just trying to get rid of them. We are still very early in the vaccine process. I alluded to earlier that just because you get both doses of the vaccine does not mean that you won't get COVID and can spread it, even though the numbers, again, are really, really small. I think that that's going to be an operational decision that's going to be made locally. about when we start to move away from masking in the stations and especially masking on calls. This can be a long time to move away from that. But I can't answer that. And I don't know that Dr. Kazan or Dr. Benson can really answer that, right? Can we give you a date that on March 1st, we're going to take those masks and we're going to throw them in the trash? It'll be a momentary to moment operational decision based upon the information we're getting about how many of our members are infected still, how much spread is going through the firehouse, what the community spread rate is. All of that is the information that has to go into that before you can make that kind of decision. I think these guys will agree with me.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we've done well following CDC's guidelines, so I'm kind of holding out for some guidance from them, and I suspect that'll be forthcoming, but it is going to be situational specific because some stations and some districts will have a higher prevalence of vaccinated folks, others won't. So there's going to be a lot of different permutations we're going to have to dance through. So it's going to be a challenge, but that is the ultimate goal down the road. We're just looking for additional science to support it.
And Dr. Benson, while you're there, I'm going to have you field the next one that we kind of got tossed up, but Justin Reyes out of Monterey County, local 2606. He was asking if there's information in relation to blood typing of a person or person's reaction severity after contracting COVID-19.
Yeah, that's been kind of a tossed around for months now, and I don't think we've really gotten any definite conclusion. There's been a lot of conflicting data. I think the most recent was saying O was the one. Previously it was B, which I was excited about because that was my blood type. I've seen it. There's not been any really definitive studies that have given us any kind of conclusion as to who we could say you definitely will do better based on your blood type and otherwise. Fellas, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I thought I remember seeing something early on that A positive was the worst, and it stuck in my head because that's my blood type.
Right.
Other than that, no, not really. There are genetic components to disease that we are only just beginning to understand, and also to therapies. Why certain medicines seem to work so much better in some people and cause side effects in other people probably has a lot to do with genetics that we just don't quite understand yet.
Ultimately, the major cause that determines severity of illness seems to be the amount of virus that somebody gets, so that the dose equals the disease. And so minimizing your exposure to the virus is more likely to result in a less serious case. I think we can say that with some definitive, be definitive in that regard. But in terms of the blood types, I think the jury's still out on that one.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Kazan, I'm going to throw this one at you. Adam Cosner out of Santa Clara County Firefighters, local 1165. How do we respond to members who feel that they should not take the vaccine so they can save it for more vulnerable members of our population who may need it?
I saw that question. That kind of tugs at my heartstrings a little bit too. And by the way, thank you, Santa Clara, because that's where my in-laws all live too. So thank you for what you do up there. Vulnerable members of society are going to be in sort of the next phases. They're coming really quickly, but remember that we can't send.
Yo, what up, dog? Good.
There we go. Okay. Remember that we won't have an emergency response to send if we can't keep you healthy. So the first thing I think is to get the healthcare workers and shore up that workforce. As an example, you heard about our rolling 10 to 15% off at any given point. So we're really beating up our members right now because those who are healthy are just getting pummeled. But the hospitals as well. So my alma mater hospital, St. Francis, had 30% of their staff out COVID positive. We can't even provide care until we can make sure that those groups are healthy, and then we can go out and start working on the seniors. And remember also, where are some of those vulnerable populations getting it from? From their caregivers. So if we can get the caregivers protected, we can actually hopefully cut the head off the snake.
All right, thank you. Dr. Mackey, I'm going to throw this next one at you. It comes from Dennis Shea out of Salinas, local 1270. While I realize that the current situation is fluid here in California, currently, when would you expect at-risk seniors to receive the vaccine? And concurrently, when would your typical senior citizen expect to realistically receive theirs?
Everything about the vaccination programs throughout the state, it all depends upon local supply. And as you guys know, that there's a tiered system that's been set up. And kudos to President Rice and Cpf for really working hard and making sure that the fire service, EMTs, and paramedics stayed in Tier 1A, so that, as Dr. Kazan said, that we can, and Dr. Benson, that we can stay ahead of this thing and try to keep our health workforce healthy. Now, to get to the specifics of the question about when the most at-risk population will receive their vaccine, again, it's going to be locally dependent, depending upon the availability of the vaccine and what tier they are in. However, this is what I would encourage, because I believe the person who asked that probably has concern, and as do all of us, about our at-risk population. And there is ability to force multiply, at least here in Sacramento. I think that you're doing it, Clayton, and I think you're doing it, Peter, as well, to force multiply and to educate and train our providers in the fire service to be vaccine administrators, which then enables the local health department to roll out the vaccine into the community in a quicker way. So when the supply becomes available, we can get at those at-risk populations considerably quicker than the limited resources of our local health departments. So the short answer is, for Salinas, I couldn't tell you because it's a local phenomenon based upon supply. But the moment that we've worked through those tiered systems, they will be in front of the line, and they are very close to being at that point.
All right, thank you. And just to add a little bit to that too, for the CPF, I sit on the Community Vaccine Advisory Committee too, and we've had a lot of these conversations, and it's a continually changing process. As information comes in, we're making decisions, and the feedback is going to up to the Department of Public Health and stuff like that. And just like you said, Dr. Mackey, it is a local issue with a lot of these things. So again, patience, and the information comes pretty fast and furious too. So we're trying to get it out there. And there's some websites that at the state for the California Department of Public Health that you can look at that are being updated constantly. The next question I'm going to throw out, and I'll throw this one to Dr. Kazan, because there's been a lot about it. Does vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc assist with fighting this disease by boosting your immune system? Excuse me.
So there's been a lot of discussion about that, because there is science to suggest that C, D, zinc, and some others do help keep a strong immune system. And then there's also an association, particularly with vitamin D, that in the elderly population, that their vitamin D wanes, and that might be part of why they get hit harder with COVID than younger populations. I have not seen anything that suggests that super therapeutic doses, meaning extra high doses of those three things, do anything to aid in preventing or recovering from COVID. I don't think it's unreasonable to take a multivitamin that includes those things, or just reasonable doses of them, just as part of overall good health. One of the things that I think is kind of unfortunate is there hasn't been a good emphasis on maintaining good health. We talk about masking and distancing and those things, but we don't talk about healthy diet, finding ways to exercise, and doing all the things that generally keep our bodies healthier, that will certainly play some role in what long-term effects we suffer from any illness that we contract, COVID or other. So I would just say there's not a lot on that. I know there's been a lot of stuff put out about all kinds of different therapeutics that are out there. If I could, I'll just branch a little bit into that. And I did a whole talk on it, and I think we put it on social media too, about ivermectin and some of the other things. Ivermectin is an anti-parasite drug. It does theoretically have an advantage in treating an infection like COVID-19, just as hydroxychloroquine theoretically should have worked. What I would say is, a lot of doctors put up a lot of very passionate stuff about how I treated my patients and they did great. And so thus, all of you should treat all of your patients with this regimen and it will work. It just doesn't work that way. There are all kinds of biases that inadvertently get introduced when we do these kinds of studies, and we share it just kind of with our own little case series. That's not to say that that is not important information, because it is. So if I treat my 50 patients with drug X and drug X works great, that doesn't mean that everyone should use drug X. What that means is it should be hypothesis generating, which means now we're going to do a study of drug X, we're going to randomize it and blind it and see if it really seems to work. And if it does, then we look at adopting it. But we go through those steps of randomized controlled trials and things, not because we want to bog down a process and bureaucracy, but because it's a safety mechanism. Because while my 50 patients may have done great with drug X, when you give it to 1 million people, it might also kill 1,000 of them, because my 50 may not have been enough to really know the effect of it. So and it may also have just done well because of my accidental bias that was introduced. So that's why we rely on randomized controlled trials. And I will say, just to get back to the vaccine topic, these 2 vaccines went through the highest bar that we have, which is double-blinded randomized controlled trials with independent organizations doing their own data review on it. And they both passed with flying colors.
That's one of the things I think that we see a lot too, Dr. Kazan, and I know you've talked about this before, is because everybody's like concerned with, how fast it's gone through. And again, just with the vaccine technology, it's gone through the same studies and everything, the same practices. It's just a lot of the roadblocks and some of the time frames have been shortened that have actually allowed it to move along quicker. So thank you for answering that. I'm going to throw this one at Dr. Mackey. What are your thoughts on the recently approved Regeneron monoclonal antibody therapy? Any talk of looking at this or offering it to firefighters with elevated risk or underlying health conditions? And then it's a pretty long question. So some studies are showing that the therapy could be infused early onset of symptoms and keep a large % of our workforce out of the hospital before developing more symptoms.
So I'm glad you said the second part, because monoclonal antibodies are designed to be used to treat people who are infected, not people who are well. And then, if you remember the graphic earlier, the army of our body is the B cell, which is the antibody producer, which is what ultimately with these vaccines will help us get in front of this pandemic. So the idea behind a monoclonal antibody is that someone who has had prior infection has theoretically produced antibodies and should have produced antibodies, and those antibodies can be isolated and then given to someone whose immune system has not had the opportunity to produce its own antibodies yet, or is very early. And so the idea is it speeds up the process for us to be able to get in front of the infection and stop it. So I think the science on monoclonal antibodies, which is based upon prior uses of monoclonal antibodies, which we use right now in other treatments like cancer, is scientifically sound. But if I had my choice between receiving monoclonal antibodies and receiving a vaccine, I'd take the vaccine any day of the week and twice on Sunday, because we still don't know enough about the monoclonal antibodies and if they are effective. And in addition to that, if you're getting the monoclonal antibodies, you're already sick. So we want to try to keep people well and stop them from getting sick and having to end up in an ICU.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that also. We're using that in our emergency room as an outpatient treatment. So folks who present within 10 days of the onset of their illness, who are stable enough to be discharged, can get a 2-hour infusion of the Regeneron. The data that they shows that it drops the return visits or getting hospitalized from a 9% rate, which they normally, if they didn't get it, to a 3%. So there is a significant reduction, but it's not, it's expensive, so not all hospitals have it. I imagine, Kevin, does Kaiser stock Regeneron or no?
I haven't given Regeneron in our ER yet. It doesn't mean that
Okay.
it's not available, but we're not giving it in our ER. I'm actually impressed that you guys are. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. So it's got, you know, generally what it is it's an outpatient population, so they're generally well anyway, so they're likely to do well. But this product has been shown to have some improvement and prevent deterioration.
All right, perfect. And while you're there, Dr. Benson, I'm going to throw this last one at you. Does starting the vaccination provide any increased protection, or is it only 14 days after the second dose?
Yeah, no, great question. It's not like a light switch. It's a slow development of that immune response. So, you know, technically speaking, 1 day afterward, you're starting to get some protection. It probably peaks around 14 days and further on after that. So that's where you get the most protection. But yes, the minute you get it, you start to develop that immune response. Obviously, you're not fully protected to the degree that is described on the vaccine until you've had your full 2 immunizations and you've gone 14 days after that. Can I go back to the vitamin D, C, and zinc real quick?
Sure.
One other important thing to remember is we have a lot of members of color who are darker complected, and that those folks generally tend to be lower in D, vitamin D, versus lighter skinned, and that is something important to remember because that can result in more severe disease. The other thing is that the zinc has also been tested with coronavirus, but not more the common cold coronavirus, and that's where the zinc as a treatment for illness actually came from. So they did trials looking at common colds and they got better within 2 or 3 days versus 7 days. So zinc has been proven to help with the coronavirus, and we know that there's enough similarity between the COVID coronavirus and the other common cold coronaviruses that there's likely some overlap. So those of us who want to potentially take some supplements, obviously not in super high doses, and want to do that, should feel comfortable that there may be some benefits to it. No big randomized trials that support that, but certainly some evidence of benefit. But I think the vitamin D, again, in groups, elderly, otherwise who are at risk for low vitamin D levels, definitely want to supplement if that's the case.
Hey, Mike, do you mind if I share one more thing? I know we're waning in the time, but I think this is important for people to see. It came out of New England Journal of Medicine on the 31st of December. And it's a graphic of antibody production in the Pfizer trial. Would you mind if I showed that to folks?
No, go ahead, Dr. Mackey.
Yeah, Dr. Mackey, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in right after you as we start to do the close up, but it's going to go for it because I want to make sure we get all of these graphics and make them available once we're offline.
Absolutely. I'll make this quick. Thank you, President Rice. Going to the top of the screen is cumulative incidence of disease. Going to the right of the screen is days after dose 1 of the Pfizer dose. If you look at the inset above, this is the number of antibodies produced, and the cumulative incidence is the line going to the top of the screen. So if you notice about day 12, the antibodies showed up after dose 1 in the Pfizer trial, and the cumulative incidence of the disease, the number of people that were getting sick, came nearly to a grinding halt. And that's the take-home point here, is the fact that once you get that first dose, the antibodies start to show up and do their job and start to prevent people from getting desperately ill. So thank you. It was a good graphic to show folks that can understand that the antibodies do start showing up and doing their job very early.
I'm glad we got that in there. And Mike, I want to thank you as our Cpf EMS Health and Safety Director for guiding this discussion. And I got to close it up, and I really don't want to. But in saying that, I can definitely see a shorter term podcast with Mike and maybe some more direct questions with the 3 of you. But this is what I want to leave our members with. These are 3 of the most trusted physicians in the fire department across the state of California. I'm not saying they're the only ones, but they're 3 of the most. And they're ones that I have access to. We tried to give you 3 of the best, to give you information in an unbiased way that could help you make decisions. Dr. Benson, Kazan, and Mackey, you delivered. So I'm going to take my role, and some of the members, you might think I'm overstepping my bounds, but I'm going to overstep. I'm asking each of you to seriously consider and take the vaccine. Be that person that the buck stops with you. The exposure stops with you. You're not bringing it home. You're not exposing your family. You're not exposing my grandparents, or actually my grandparents are all gone. You're not exposing my parents. You're not exposing Dr. Mackey's or Dr. Kazan's. That's what this is all about. It is not about our politics. It is not about our stance. It's about being a sworn public servant, a sworn public safety officer. And this is part of the bad. And it's treating the members of our community that are horribly sick with it, but also being part of the solution and being vaccinated and being in a position that you can safely treat any member in your community that calls you. This is not about you. This is about your family. This is about others. And, you know, I cannot stress it enough. The right thing to do is to be vaccinated. I think back to when I was on the job and AIDS and HIV came out, and we didn't know a damn thing about it. And I worked in Sacramento, and 100 miles away, tens of thousands of men died in then the Polk and the Castro district, and we didn't know why. And we didn't wear gloves. We didn't wear masks. We've come so much farther. We learned about that virus. It is not as it is dangerous, but it is not as transferable as others. To me, it's one of the most safe things to deal with. This is not. You can get it and you can spread it. And we don't need to be that person. And I'll tell you this, we are pushing, and I want to talk to each of these 3 doctors offline. We need to be part of the community vaccination program. And many things have happened in the last 24 hours that promote that. So as we close this out, you guys know me, I get passionate. Get vaccinated. I'm asking you to do it. We as your CPF, your executive board, your leaders brought the brightest in front of you. And that's the message I'm going to leave you with. I want to thank each and every member. I want to thank the executive board and the staff for being here. And with that, we're going to close up. Dr. Kazan, Dr. Mackey, and Dr. Benson, thank you, not just for speaking to our members, but for looking after the members in the areas you serve. You're our doctors. Thank you.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, doctors.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.